Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Beatrice Eleuteri and I'm a PhD student at the Department of Education of University of Roma Tre. Today, I will be talking about a particular aspect of the school library's action, and that's about teenagers and their idea and conception of the reader, the book, and library themselves. Here, and on the PDF file that will be available for download, you can find a small biography of my works and studies, and the abstract for this intervention. Then let's get to it. We get a small introduction on teenagers and reading, an explanation of the factors that can influence reading in adolescence, and some suggestions and consideration about reading behavior among teenagers. First of all, let's dispel a myth, according to which teenagers don't read. Kids increase cognitive and linguistic competence, and their need for experiences, physical or mediated, makes them the ideal readers. Reading satisfies their need for competence, epistemic curiosity, and empathy. It gives them a private space in which they can build themselves, find shelter, get scared, lost and found, to experiment safely from the inauspicious consequences they could get run over in the real world. Stories are the perfect ground to bring on their cultural primary instinct, anthropopoiesis, the construction of the human being, so the construction of their identity. So we know that teenagers read, and that the age between 11 and 14 years old is the one in Italy that collects the greater number of readers at all. But, there's a but. In the age range immediately following this one, we can see a slow but continuous decrease of readers. And as adulthood approaches, against any advice, the wave of non-readers gets bigger and higher. First for boys, around 15 years old, and then for girls, around 19 years old, till a 60% of non-readers in the adulthood. Something happens between 13 and 19, which defines the relation future adults have with the book, and qualitative surveys made to analyze motivational factors behind adults and teens' reading behaviors seems to bring out a serious anthropological and sociological phenomenon that undermines reading motivation. The rise of an aversion, a growing negative connotation of the book and the reader, which brings into a deconstruction of literary imaginary and destruction of the social thrust to read and pursue information. And that's why, in May 2018, an experimental survey has taken place in Rome to test a new method of qualitative research founded on debate session. Aim of the project was to investigate what could hide behind the declaration of boredom and indifference that ISTAT, our national agency for statistics, reported for non-readers between 11 and 19 years old, and what brought teen readers to insist in their behavior instead. The survey suggests how, in the reading field as in others, boredom and apparent apathy are often masks for anxiety and fear for negative judgment, especially related to the value system promoted by the sociocultural environment, which changes with the individual's sense of belonging to his group. For example, the lack of correct learning strategies could comport to take more time and excessive effort compared to the offered benefits that could lead to considering reading too tiring and obsolete activity, preferring other kinds of leisures and sources of information because of a state of frustration. At the same time, the internalization of beliefs regarding our reading ability or the impossibility to change it, a wrong concept of intelligence, for example, may be related to a bad experience, such public reading that determines the association between reading and a state of anxiety that could lead to a low perception of competence and fear for failure, then adopt strategies of self-defense that could range from simple avoidance to mockery or even aggression due to a sense of inferiority. Then, a teenager coming from a bookless home experiments stories and texts at school, and there he will be moved his first steps towards the literary world. And that's often the moment where the institution who should have the mission to make up for the disadvantage or origins of the populace, coming from culturally deprived families, becomes the setting in which the good book transforms into the bad one, and little novice readers who used to get excited when the teacher read them out loud turn into teenagers with an indifferent or, if not even hostile, conception of the text and its manifestation. Then, the attractiveness of a determined behavior such as reading is therefore defined by the whole series of rational, relational, emotional, and sociologic factors that produce the social and affective value of experience, and only at last its usability, considering it all one with the object, book or test. While we concentrate rightly on defining the best school methodologies to improve reading and writing learning strategies and to avoid a wrong perception of competence in pupils, we also often underrate or worse endorse the acritical internalization of society value system that leads kids to experiment with an inescapable feeling of detachment between institutional paternalism, reading is good, and real social convenience, reading is for losers. This phenomenon, that we could call the epiphany of the non-reader, is stronger and more visible as weaker and sporadic was his reading behavior before, especially if matched to the difficulties previously described. That could lead to feel ashamed of reading because it's not a cultural approved activity, and to put in act compensative strategies meant to defend self-esteem and need of belonging, so a non-reading choice and the abandon of the book. It is useful to remind two things. The first is that we are not born to read. Our brain has to adapt to learn reading. The second thing is that the range of age between 11 and 14 certainly collects the greater number of readers in comparison with the others, but they are mostly understandable. Weak readers who read 1 to 6 books in a year. We have the mission to transform them into strong ones by making reading evolve from fascination to love, as the song said. From a way to satisfy the teacher to a passion to satisfy their desires for discovery and wonder. It is a sensitive operation aimed at preserving the act of reading for pleasure and letting it grow, avoiding the danger of turning every book into torture and past the idea that after childhood reading's only use is to memorize and summarize, that they only have to get through school age to have the freedom to never have to open a book anymore. This duty is not simple, and it gets harder and harder as adulthood approaches. Now, let's take a look at the reader. The stereotype of the reader that has been created in the centuries is pitiless. This description is a patchwork reconstruction of various statements relieved by the 2018 survey. So these are the words of the teenagers who participated. We know a prejudice arises when a single experience is generalized into a law, easily spreadable because it is a superficial judgment, so an anecdotic fallacy. It can become popular and be used as a base for an argument. It's the bandwagon fallacy, bringing more and more people to believe it without further proof, following the common judging bias. In the end, if a prejudice is about an activity or a group of identifiable people, it can become a stereotype, a caricatural image, which the category gets associated to. So, studying how and why this image of the reader emerged in the ear certainly needs a serious and deep studies. Could it be because of the unforgettable description by which every Italian student meets greeter writers at school? First of all, the sad and lonely Giacomo Leopardi. Could it be because maybe in the deep there's something real in the neorealistic portrait of the reader? Why does he have to be in a dark room and always crooked and antisocial? But if these are the words of non-readers, let's take a look at the voice of readers. The voice of teen readers, especially girls, because we know girls read more, who took part to the survey, together with wonderful and personal stories about how reading helped them to overcome difficult moments in their lives, and enthusiastic description of imaginary worlds they explored thanks to books. They agree to the same single point. To start loving reading, you need to read. You need to find the right story which will transfigurate a pile of paper, glue and beads in a flow experience, pure pleasure. And we know that. But how can we meet the right book? It's actually extremely difficult to let a non-reader understand the sensation a text can arouse in a reader. Differently from a lot of other enjoyable and addictive activities, reading doesn't show itself out of the act of doing it. It doesn't have the spectacular nature of ancient Greek speeches anymore. It is an intimate and silent process which needs time and dedication. All the activities that can be done together, participating in a collective rites, are amplified, and even just watching someone doing it can boost a desire to be part of it, motivating us to try it personally thanks to the action of mirror neurons, the basis for our empathic and learning through imitation abilities. But what does seeing someone reading induces in a non-reader observer? Well, what we can see from the outside, it is a human being concentrated on a device that could be a mobile, a book, or an e-reader, not particularly expressive, deaf to external inputs because soaked in a flow experience, in a word far from phenometric experience. In front of this image, the non-reader has to make a choice. The first one is to strive to understand why the simple activity seems to catch the reader so much, and to catch his attention, taking up the challenge with a book itself, or especially if he has been signed with negative experience, the second choice could be simply judge the reader and his cryptic behavior, bringing him back to the friendless haggard stereotype. So we return to the bandwagon fallacy. To help non-readers make this choice and choose to try reading, we have to put them in situation when they can see an authoritative or an influential figures to read. And that's the reason why it is fundamental to see parents, teachers, partners, personally important people reading, especially if considered as successful people. More real people with a life, a job, a family interest we see reading and speaking about reading, weaker the antisocial stereotype of the reader will become, more blurry the image of the library rat, the ivory towel intellectual we get. For teenagers, the right parallelism we can do is with music. I challenge anybody to find a teenager who doesn't possess a listening device, from basic mobile functionalities to bigger and bulky boomboxes. Maybe boomboxes doesn't exist anymore, but we have certainly speakers really loud. We see them everywhere, on the streets, in the underground, laying down on beds, on sofas, concentrated and a little frowning while listening to some pop, rock, indie and trap music. And that's not a phenomenon of today. It's been centuries that young people are attracted to music and to the use of music. But yet, none of their peers would call them misfits, pointing them out like weirdos, friendless, or out of the world like they do with readers. So, why should reading be different? So, let's talk about the main agency that should reevaluate the image of the reader and the book. Libraries. School and school libraries. So from the words of the kids participating the 2018 surveys to the question, what is the library for? These are the three main answers. To get free books, but you can't write on them, to borrow dictionaries, and to study an undue religion class, which is a facultative class in Italy. Well, many kids enter the library for the first time only to find a place to study. And that's wrong. Dragged in by friends or desperately looking for a quiet place to do homework without distraction. That's not really wrong, but that's not the only role of the library. The frequent lack of appropriate facilities and services for teenagers and the intolerance many librarians demonstrate to this kind of users, which actually they consider inappropriate users, won't help to unbuild the idea of the library that they had in their mind. And that's another stereotype, coming from the common judgment and movies. An old and silent book depository, a giant study room inhabited by elderly and hysterical university students, which are ruled by librarians too often on the edge of misanthropy. Well, actually, the Italian libraries and librarians needed ages to start realizing that there was a urge to increase opening hours, to create academic courses for future librarians, to accept the idea that the library is an active cultural aid linked with local agency, that a library can be a noisy and living place full of activities and reading out loud, not just for children. An exchanging center where knowledge and discovery wanders from books to mouth. Well, we are still working on it in Italy, but it's tough to eradicate the elitist, boring and old image created among the centuries on libraries and librarians. In short, next to the reader's ghost, there's an entire haunted mansion, a solid stereotype that is really difficult to dispel, especially taking a look to Italian libraries' presence and services data. In fact, in 2014, Italy had 6,042 public libraries for about 8,000 municipalities, with an average of only 34 seats and 2.5 personal computer stations. Only 54% of them, of the libraries, has a Wi-Fi connection, and the average opening time is of 24 hours a week. And only 40% of libraries open during the weekend. And 34% of the staff is composed by volunteers, and they are not always trained. Then, if we consider the image of the school and what school does too often, at school, maybe as in the family, kids will meet people who will tell them that reading is useful, of course, that is healthy, that it is a duty. And someone will maybe try to explain that it can be a pleasure as well, but if you'll never see them read, you will unlikely believe it for a long time. So it's crucial to find a way to balance duty and pleasure, and that can be done in school libraries. In fact, to avoid handing down this prejudice of the librarians, and to help schools to behave with the next generation and to create a complete and continuous promotional partner, it becomes fundamental to highlight and empower the present of action of living and active school libraries connected to public ones. This mission, of course, implies comfortable reading spaces, big rooms, various and up-to-date collection, but most of all, time to read and the presence of supporting teachers, good technologies and fast connection, but people intended as professionals and peers, because reading is an habitus, like Bourdieu's conception of it, that can be fitting. It's a dress that can be fitting tight or loose, that we need to try it on before purchase. And school libraries are the favorite environment where kids, even ones coming from culturally steering contexts, must feel safe to talk about stories, experiences, opinions. It's a place meant to meet books, of course, but above all, readers. It's a shop where they can learn how to sew their reading habitus, their reading vest, rejuvenating it for the mousy image of the library rat so they can grow inside it. Yes, of course, teenagers in the library need inputs, a choice of titles that can suit them, but more than a shelf to contain them, they need a comfortable space to read them, talk about them, share them. In Italy, the name itself, kids' literature or kids' room, leaves interpretation space to what could be the real age group addressed to it. In most Italian libraries, we can often recognize a special room destined to younger readers and their activities, where children with little chairs, with old colored stuffed animals and things like it. But teens usually only have maybe a shelf or two in which they can find different materials, mostly comics, because teenagers like comics, and graphic novels and educational novels, but without a real common standard. But we don't just need a bibliography. We need a space where there is no silence rule. We need a space where they can feel free to read whatever they want without being judged for it, where after searching the shelves they can shelter and experiment, knowing that the place is meant for them and not just to handle out vocabularies or show off the school's most prestigious collection, because a lot of school libraries are not really functional in this moment. And that's because the library, most of all, needs to be managed by a competent and trained figure, the school librarian, which unfortunately doesn't exist in Italy. We don't have that figure. This lack created a huge qualitative gaps because it leaves school libraries management and initiatives where they actually exist completely to the willingness and the unpredictable critical spirit of the invested professor. And often, but unfortunately not always, it is not really wishful to ask for qualified librarians' help. So, to get out of this carelessness spiral, to allow libraries to smash the stereotype and do their irreplaceable job of coordination and promotion, especially helping schools to counteract the epiphany effect we talked about before, to balance duty and pleasure, school time and free time, silence and dialogue, comprehension, literacy and imagination, reading for study, reading for pleasure. It is required to define and clench the crucial importance of the professional who take part in this action. Everyone who wants to call himself a promoter needs three main traits: preparation, motivation, and openness. Every high school teacher professor who cares for his professional role, every parent who thinks about his or her children's future, and every citizen who worries about new generation educational fate should pretend that they spend their learning years under the guidance of professionals, specifically trained to educate them, stimulate their creativity, and help them to develop self-control strategies and self-motivation, each playing a specific role: librarians, teacher, education, and school librarians, of course. And that means also to defeat the camel theory, the one that says that before beginning our life journey, we receive all the mental feeding we need to deal with the entire track. And that makes adults feel that once past their school years, they don't need reading and studying anymore. That's actually a wrong idea that we don't have to spread, but actually we have to defeat. And that's through our professionality, our knowledge, the exchange of our knowledge, and the monitoring of our action. Of course, to motivate reading presupposes to know the field, the methods, and the promotional strategies. But most of all, we need to be motivated ourselves, to feed our passion, to allow it to spread more and deeper, to embody the image of the reader we try to promote against the common judgment of futility of culture, of study, and of effort itself. Also, reading needs time, not only to read books, but primarily to choose them, browse them, talk about them. We can't pretend that kids will read at home if we don't dedicate time and space to do that at school. That's why it is necessary to make a common effort towards the definition of a flexible program which will allow educators and promoters to give time to the vital uselessness of art, that gives space to the kids' proposal, their desiderata, talking about them in class, creating testimonials of the specific book at first and of reading itself in the future. There are no particular themes that need to be selected or chosen, maybe the styles, communication modes from different authors in a process that can lead the unripe reader from a simple and linear style to a more complex and stimulating poetic, never sacrificing contents, quality, experiences, and the emotional charge. Without censors, with enough time, that is actually the most precious gift we can offer them. Establishing an hour for reading every day should be a common practice, at any age and in every different context, especially educative ones. An hour it means an hour to dedicate to all kinds of readings, and of course, in which teachers and educators first should read what they like and experience different storytellings. And that's the base of Hidden Chamber circle. The educator is in the center of the circle, and the circle is made by the choice of the reader, the answer of the reader, and so the talking to the educator, and to the act of reading itself. So talking, and that leads to openness. Openness. First to new technologies, of course, which are not that new after all. To analyze them, decompose them, and then incorporate them in school and in library practices. To use new forms of communication critically, following new paths, but never abandoning the millenary, the thousand-of-year tradition of the written word. But openness also and primarily means transdisciplinarity and cooperation between professionals, an habit that we should increase to allow institutions to develop long-term educational plans and carry on projects based on more than just one person's enthusiasm. Reading is a transversal ability and it crosses sciences, art, even sports. So why confining it to the literature classes? Reading is not a subject among the others. It is a tool with thousands of facets, purposes, and uses which from school libraries must expand into houses, gardens, chats, and groups. In fact, and that's what we need to keep in mind, how deep is the influence of peers in defining a teenager's conception of pleasure and aesthetics? It is the most important magnetic pole for kids, and not only for them, as well as the more difficult field for promoter to influence. So, dialogues, also intergenerational. Reading circles, social reading are all places of a social dimension of reading that often stays unnoticed to non-readers, which fits the famous antisocial prejudice. Meeting and exchange moments are needed to give birth and action to what Daniel Pennac called passeurs. They are riders of knowledge, riders of reading itself. And professor, librarians, parents, we have the very sensitive task to build the path towards context and activities which carry a high probability of meeting same-age readers, because the influence of peers is so strong, and we need to influence our kids from the start as role models and encourage them to gather and attend theaters, libraries, cinemas, reading, writing, artistic clubs, but not forcing them or imposing them just because it is right or it's healthy. We know a teenager can seek in the book what he looks for in movies, music, and video games. Stories, characters, adventure companions. And we have to avoid that this cultural behavior, reading, and its representatives, which are books, but readers themselves and libraries, we have to avoid that they come to be socially and psychologically associated with disadvantage, boredom, elitism, and judged as old and laughable. We need to destroy the stereotype. In other words, to paint over the imaginary idea that kids have of books, readers, libraries, and reading itself, and replace it with a more realistic idea which is based on a flow experience. Here is an essential bibliography that I used for this intervention, and some more will be found on the full text edition that will come out. We know that the encounter with the written word can be very slow and difficult. And the important thing is to set the stage for the right book, the right story, so that people, that us, not only kids, that we can make the revolutionary choice to declare ourselves as readers, destroying stereotypes. I really thank you for your attention, and I invite you for further information to contact me at the email address you can see on screen. I hope that my English struggles didn't get too much in the way, and I wish you a really good day.
Libraries are boring.
Excuse me?
They're stuffy and formal.
Except they're filled with friendly, helpful people.
Nothing but books.
And movies, and classes, and telescopes, and
Books.
recording gear, art.
And more books.
What do you have against books anyway?
Which brings me back to my first point.
Did you have more than one?
Libraries are boring.
Totally not boring.
Visit a boring
Maybe you're boring.
Toledo Lucas County Public Library near you.